The August air of 480 BC is dense, salted by the nearby Muliac Gulf and metallic with the stench of blood and sweat. Here, in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the known world is compressed into a bottleneck scarcely 100 meters wide. The sound is a deafening cacophony, an incessant hammering of iron against bronze, the roar of thousands of throats, and the sinister whistle of a storm of arrows that darkens the sun. At the center of this earthly hell stands a wall, not of stone, but of men. Spartan phalanx, their great bronze shields interlocked to form an impenetrable shell, stands like a cliff against which a human tide breaks. Through the cracks of this living fortress, long ash spears project and retract with lethal efficiency, each movement a hammer blow on the anvil of war. Against this steel discipline crashes the overwhelming force of the Persian Empire, the largest army ever assembled. They are a flood of nations, a mosaic of exotic warriors from every corner of Xerxes' empire, driven forward by the will of a single man who believes himself a god. Their cries are fierce, their scimitars gleam, but they collide with a brotherhood forged in the brutality of the Agage, the Spartan training system that turned children into the most lethal weapons of the ancient world. For every Spartan that falls, 10 Persians pay the price. In the heart of the storm, with his crimson cloak and horsehair-crested helmet, King Leonidas of Sparta roars his commands. His voice is the anchor in the chaos, his presence a beacon of defiance. He is the embodiment of an idea, that a few free men fighting for their land are worth more than a multitude of slaves. This is not simply the story of a glorious slaughter or an honorable suicide, as it is often remembered. The legend of the 300 hides a deeper strategic truth. Leonidas and his elite contingent, part of an allied Greek force of some 7,000 men, did not march to the hot gates to stop the Persian army. Definitively, they knew that was impossible. Their mission was to execute the most brilliant rearguard action in history. They used the terrain as a weapon, turning the enemy's greatest strength, their crushing numbers, into a fatal weakness. Their sacrifice was not an act of desperation, but a calculated maneuver to buy the most valuable asset in any war: time. Time for the rest of Greece to unite, to prepare, and to forge the victory that would define the course of Western civilization. At the Io, head of this spear of defiance, stands a man who is Sparta incarnate, King Leonidas III. He is no monarch of luxuries and halls, but a hardened warrior, a product of the brutal Agage, a system designed to eradicate weakness and forge souls of iron. Every muscle in his body, every scar on his skin, is a testament to a life of discipline and pain. He marches to Thermopylae with a grim determination, fully aware of the prophecy from the oracle at Delphi, that to save Sparta, a Spartan king must die. He does not seek survival but immortality through sacrifice. His emotional state is not one of fear but of purpose. He is a man who has accepted his destiny and intends to drag an empire with him to the threshold of legend, creating an example of courage that will burn in the memory of men forever. His personal guard, the vanguard of the Greek force, is composed of 300 of the finest hoplites Sparta has ever produced. But they are not just any warriors. Each of them is a father with a living son, a deliberate selection to ensure their bloodlines would not be extinguished with their foreseeable death. They are the seeds of Sparta's future, sent to die to guarantee it. Behind them stands the rest of the allied force, some 7,000 soldiers from various city-states like Thespiae and Thebes, united by a common cause. Their motivation is as pure as the steel of their swords: the defense of Eleutheria, Greek freedom, against the tide of tyranny and slavery that Persia, EU, represented. For the Spartans, this is more than a war. It is the fulfillment of their existential purpose, where a glorious death on the battlefield is the pinnacle of life. On the opposite side of the board sits the self-proclaimed King of Kings, Xerxes I, monarch of the vast Achaemenid Empire. He is a man consumed by the shadow of his father, Darius, and his humiliating defeat at the Battle of Marathon a decade earlier. Xerxes' arrogance is as colossal as his empire, and his patience is inversely proportional. Seated on his throne, he observes the small force opposing him with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. He is incapable of understanding the mindset of these men. In his world, men fight out of fear of a king or for the promise of gold. The idea of fighting and dying for an abstract concept like freedom is alien to him. a madness that must be mercilessly crushed to restore the natural order of things. His absolute will over the known world. The instrument of that will is an army of almost mythical scale. Modern estimates, more conservative than Herodotus's fantastic figures, place its strength between 70,000 and 300,000 men. It is a multinational tide, a legion of conquered peoples marching under a single banner. It includes the elite infantry, the legendary 10,000 immortals, heavy cavalry corps, and thousands of archers capable of loosing clouds of projectiles that obscure the sky. Xerxes' strength lies in his crushing numerical superiority, an advantage he considers invincible, a divine hammer with which he will bend Greece to his will. This blind faith in quantity over quality is his fatal flaw, his blind spot. He drastically underestimates how well-chosen terrain can nullify his power and the devastating effectiveness of the Greek hoplite, a deadly specialist in close-quarters combat. The chosen battlefield is in itself an act of strategic genius, the Pass of Thermopylae. Its name, which translates to the Hot Gates, for its sulfurous springs, is prophetic of the hell that is about to be unleashed. In 480 BC, this coastal pass was radically different from how we know it today. It was an exceedingly narrow bottleneck, with the impassable slopes of Mount Kalidromos on one side and the waters of the Maliac Gulf on the other, leaving in some places a passage so tight that barely a single chariot could pass. This terrain becomes the most important character in the battle. It is the great equalizer, a natural fortress that forces the colossal Persian army to abandon its flanking tactics and attack in thin frontal waves, as if trying to force a river through the eye of a needle. The terrain strips Xerxes of his greatest advantage and forces him to fight a face-to-face butchery. The decision to give battle here, and not in open country, is the masterstroke of Leonidas and the Greek alliance. They understood a fundamental truth of asymmetric warfare: never fight on the enemy's terms. Facing the Persian, horde on the plains of Thessaly would have been mass suicide, a swift and inglorious annihilation. By choosing Thermopylae, the Greeks were not just defending, they were setting a death trap. They transformed Xerxes' greatest asset, his overwhelming numbers, into his greatest liability, creating a congestion of men and equipment that only served to feed the meat grinder of the phalanx. They forced the giant to fight like a common man, in a dark alley where superiority in armor, training, and individual valor would become the decisive factor. The war would be decided not by how many men you had, but by the quality of the men you had on the front line. Xerxes, in a display of imperial arrogance, waits 4 full days before ordering the attack. From his elevated position, he beholds the minuscule Greek force, convinced that the mere sight of his vast army would make them flee in terror. But the Greeks do not move. They remain silent, a thorn of bronze and defiance in the throat of his empire. Finally, Xerxes' patience runs out. On the morning of the 5th day, he gives the order. The first wave, composed of his Median and Sicyan troops, advances with war cries, expecting to overwhelm the defenders in a matter of minutes. The initial clash is a thunder of metal, a roar that echoes off the walls of the pass. The Persian tide smashes against the Spartan shield wall and, instead of breaking it, shatters itself. The long Greek spears, operating from the safety of the phalanx, inflict a gruesome carnage. The superiority of the Greek hoplite is brutally manifest. His large bronze shield, the aspis, offers almost total protection, while his Corinthian helmet, cuirass, and greaves make him a human tank. The Persian soldier, with his linen armor and wicker shield, is tragically vulnerable in this type of combat. The Spartan spears, longer and more robust, keep the short Persian swords and axes at bay. When a Persian does manage to get close, he is met by the xiphos, the Greek short sword, a lethal weapon in the brutality of close combat. The first waves are slaughtered, their bodies piling up to form a hideous rampart that the next attackers must climb. The Greek discipline is flawless. The ranks rotate, allowing fresh men to replace the fatigued, keeping the defensive line as solid as it was at the start. From his throne, Xerxes watches the slaughter with growing fury and disbelief. Legend says he leaped from his seat on 3 occasions, fearing for the annihilation of his men. Frustrated and humiliated, he decides to end this farce. He orders the advance of his elite corps, the Royal Guard, the 10,000 immortals. Their very name was a tool of propaganda, as it was said that any who fell was instantly replaced, keeping their number forever constant. Led by the general Hydarnes, they advance with a confidence born of countless victories. They are the best soldiers in the empire, equipped with better weaponry and superior discipline. Their entry into the battle should be the masterstroke that finally breaks the stubborn Greek resistance. The real fight, Xerxes thought, began now. But even the immortals proved to be mortal before the Spartan fury. Their assault, though more organized and fierce, crashes against the same wall of bronze and steel. The Spartans employ a devastating tactic, the feigned retreat. In a coordinated moment, a section of the phalanx would fall back, feigning disorder and panic. The immortals, eager for victory, would break their formation and charge after them in a chaotic pursuit. At that precise instant, the Greeks would stop, regroup in the blink of an eye, and counterattack a disorganized and exposed enemy. The carnage was repeated, but this time it was Xerxes' finest who fell by the hundreds. The psychological blow to the Persian army was immense. If not even the immortals could break the line, who could? The first day of battle ends with a resounding Greek victory, and a humiliating one for Persia. The second day follows a similar pattern of failed assaults and massive Persian casualties. Xerxes' frustration turns to desperation. His numerical hammer cannot break the Greek anvil. But when hope seems lost for the invaders, the fate of the battle is changed, not by force of arms, but by the weakness of one man. As night falls, a lone figure approaches the Persian camp. His name is Ephialtes, a local shepherd from the region of Trachis. Moved by greed and the promise of a great reward, he presents himself before the King of Kings with information worth more than an entire army. He knows a secret of the terrain, a hidden path that winds through the Kalidromos mountains and descends behind the Greek position. It is the path of betrayal. For Xerxes, Ephialtes' revelation is a gift from the gods. The key to unlocking the stalemate has fallen into his hands. He does not waste a moment. Immediately, he orders his general Hydarnes to take the rest of the immortals and follow Ephialtes through the night along the mountain trail, known as the Anapia Path. Their mission is to encircle the defenders and attack them from the rear at dawn. While the Greeks sleep, exhausted but victorious after 2 days of heroic struggle, death creeps silently through the mountains behind them. The plan is simple and lethal: to crush the Greek resistance in a pincer movement, turning their fortress into a death trap from which there would be no escape. The fate of Leonidas and his men is sealed, not by force, but by treason. At dawn on the third day, Phocian sentinels guarding the path are surprised by the advance of the immortals. Though they offer brief resistance, they are quickly overwhelmed and retreat to raise the alarm. The news hits the Greek camp like a thunderbolt. They are surrounded. The position is untenable. The battle, in a tactical sense, is lost. It is in this moment of absolute crisis that Leonidas makes the decision that will elevate him from king to legend. He understands that the strategic objective of the mission, to delay the Persian army, has been accomplished. Now his duty is to save as many Greek soldiers as possible so they can fight in the battles to come. He orders the immediate withdrawal of the majority of the Allied contingent, urging them to live to defend Greece another day. His decision is not an act of defeat, but the supreme sacrifice of a leader. He and his 300 Spartans will not retreat. Spartan law forbids retreat or surrender on the battlefield. Their destiny is to fight and die at the post they have been assigned, but they will not die alone. In an act of incredible courage and loyalty, the 700 soldiers from Thespiae, commanded by Demophilus, refuse to abandon their allies. They voluntarily choose to stay and share their fate, a decision often overshadowed by Spartan fame, but no less heroic. Alongside them remain 400 Thebans, whose loyalty was dubious and who, according to some sources, were held as hostages. This small force, now aware of their imminent death, prepares for its last and most glorious stand. The final clash is an explosion of desperate fury. Attacked simultaneously by Xerxes' main army from the front and by Hydarnes' immortals from the rear, the Greeks abandon the narrow wall and regroup on a small nearby hill. They know there is no escape. Their only objective now is to take as many enemies with them as possible, to sell their lives at the highest imaginable price. They fight no longer with the discipline of the phalanx, but with the ferocity of cornered lions. When their spears break, they draw their short swords and carve a path through the Persian ranks. When their swords are blunted or lost, they fight with their bare hands and teeth, refusing to yield a single step. In the midst of this maelstrom of violence, King Leonidas falls, struck down by Persian arrows. His death, far from breaking his men's morale, ignites it in a final, defiant blaze of fury. The surviving Spartans and Thespians throw themselves into a frenzy to protect the body of their fallen king, refusing to let the Persians claim it as a trophy. A savage battle is fought over Leonidas's corpse, where the Greeks manage to drive the Persians back 4 times, recovering his body. It is a final demonstration of loyalty and love for their leader, a last act of defiance against an empire. They fight until their strength abandons them, outnumbered 100 to 1, wounded, and utterly exhausted. The hill is covered with corpses, both Persian and Greek. The few defenders left standing are a walking testament to human endurance. Xerxes, having already lost 2 of his own brothers in the fight and unwilling to sacrifice more men in close combat against these demons, gives the final order. He calls for his archers to advance and finish the job from a distance. The last stand is silenced under an unceasing rain of arrows. The projectiles fall like a deadly hailstorm, striking broken shields and the flesh of the last heroes. One by one, the defenders fall, until the last roar fades and only the whistle of the wind and the silence of death remain at the hot gates. When the dust settles and the echo of battle fades, the true cost of the Persian victory is revealed in all its starkness. The battlefield is a slaughterhouse. Herodotus, the historian, claims that Persian casualties amounted to some 20,000 men, a staggering figure. In contrast, the Greek losses, though total for the force that remained, are estimated at between 2,000 and 4,000 men over the 3 days of combat. The casualty ratio is a devastating shock and a public humiliation for Xerxes' might. For every Greek who fell, at least 5 Persians died, and likely many more. The tactical Persian victory had the bitter taste of a strategic defeat. They had forced the gate, yes, but the price had been terrible, proving that the conquest of Greece would not be the triumphal march the King of Kings had envisioned. Xerxes' reaction to his Pyrrhic victory reveals the true nature of his tyranny. Filled with an impotent rage at the humiliating losses, which included 2 of his own brothers, he seeks a scapegoat for his frustration. He orders the body of Leonidas to be found among the piles of the dead. When it is brought before him in an act of barbarism that violated all customs of war and the Hellenic respect for the honored dead, Xerxes orders the Spartan king's head to be cut off and impaled on a pike, and his body to be crucified. This act of desecration was not a sign of strength, but of weakness. The tantrum of a tyrant who, despite having won the ground, felt he had been morally defeated by a man who chose to die on his feet rather than live on his knees. Meanwhile, the news of the sacrifice spreads throughout Greece, carried by the soldiers Leonidas had sent home. It does not arrive as the chronicle of a defeat, but as the epic of a legendary sacrifice. The story of how a handful of free men held back the world's largest army for 3 days becomes an instant rallying cry. The name of Leonidas and his 300 becomes a symbol of indomitable resistance and courage. The time they bought with their blood was crucial. It allowed the allied Greek navy, which had been fighting a simultaneous naval battle in the Strait of Artemisium, to withdraw in good order. More importantly, it gave the city of Athens the time needed to complete its evacuation, setting the stage for the next and decisive chapter of the war. The strategic impact of the sacrifice at Thermopylae was immense and almost immediate. Those few days of delay that Leonidas bought with the lives of his men proved to be the hinge upon which the fate of the invasion turned. They allowed the Greek fleet, under the command of the Athenian strategist Themistocles, to reposition in the more favorable waters of the Strait of Salamis. This move was key. The Persian invasion was entirely dependent on its fleet for supply and support. The land army could not operate in Greece without it. By luring the much larger but less maneuverable Persian navy into the confined waters of Salamis, the Greeks set a perfect naval trap. The tactical defeat at Thermopylae became the setup for a decisive strategic victory that would cripple Xerxes' campaign. A few weeks later, the Battle of Salamis proved the value of Leonidas' sacrifice. The smaller but more agile Greek fleet annihilated the Saltae Persian navy in the strait. This devastating naval defeat left Xerxes' vast army stranded in Greece, its supply lines cut and vulnerable. Xerxes was forced to retreat to Asia with a large portion of his forces, leaving a contingent under his general Mardonius to attempt to complete the conquest the following year. Without naval support, this residual army would ultimately be defeated at the Battle of Plataea. Thermopylae was not an isolated event. It was the first crucial domino that, in falling, triggered the chain of events that led to the final expulsion of the Persians and the preservation of Greek independence. Beyond its military importance, the Battle of Thermopylae transformed into a foundational myth for Western civilization. It became the ultimate embodiment of the struggle for freedom against oppression, a powerful rallying cry that helped to unify the normally fractious Greek city-states against a common enemy. The story of a small group of men who valued their liberty so much they were willing to die for it was seared into the Greek collective consciousness. The courage of Leonidas, the loyalty of the Thespians, and the sacrifice of all who fell became the standard by which future heroism would be measured. They proved to the world that the strength of an army lies not only in its numbers, but in the cause for which it fights. This echo has resonated through the centuries. The story of Thermopylae has inspired countless generations of soldiers, leaders, and citizens. It has become a cornerstone of Western identity, a perennial reminder that tyranny can and must be resisted, no matter how overwhelming the odds. From the philosophers of antiquity to modern revolutionaries, the example of the 300 has been invoked as the ultimate symbol of sacrifice for a greater good. The battle did not just save Greece, it helped to forge an ideal, the belief that there are principles worth dying for. The legend of Leonidas became immortal, a beacon of defiance that continues to illuminate the fight for freedom across the globe. After the wars ended and the Persians were driven out, the Greeks erected a monument on the hill where the last stand took place. Upon it, an inscription was carved, an epitaph attributed to the poet Simonides of Chios. It did not speak of glory, of fury, or of the carnage of battle. Its words were simple, direct, and profoundly moving, capturing the very essence of the Spartan spirit. It read, "Go, tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." In that brief sentence resides an unyielding strength. There is no boasting, only the statement of a duty fulfilled. It is the silent testimony of men who did exactly what they were commanded, what their culture and their honor demanded, to their very last breath. It is the ultimate expression of sacrifice as an act of service, not of vanity. Thus, the legend of the 300 is not a story of failure, but the tale of a resounding success measured in the most valuable currency, the future. Leonidas and his men lost the battle, but they won the war. Their bodies fell in that narrow pass, but their purpose rose, becoming a torch that ignited the spirit of Greece. Their sacrifice was not the end of Greek resistance, but the beginning of its finest hour. They forged in blood and steel a legend that would forever prove that a few brave individuals, steadfast in their purpose and bound by honor, can stand against the might of empires and change the course of history. They did not stop the enemy forever. They did something far more important. They taught the world how to fight.